So, as far as specific bills go, I was able to take some notes on Florida specific bills because that's where I'm located. These are bills that have been passed in Florida. There are hundreds of bills like them across the country. Some of them have failed, some of them are still floating around in the process of being passed or not. All in one day, recently, sometime in the last week, you know who, I'm not gonna say his name, fuck that guy, signed like, I think 5 bills at once, starting with HB 1069, which is referred to as the Don't Say Gay bill. This has been in the works for months, if not a year now, I think, but as of recently, it has extended the prohibition of classroom instruction on sexual orientation, gender identity, etc., things of that nature, from kindergarten through grade 3 to now pre-kindergarten through grade 8. Technically, it's still allowed for high school. However, there are going to be very specific terms of what's allowed to be said, how they're allowed to discuss these things, including, the bill itself defines sex in very binary terms. I'll read it out. It says, sex means the classification of a person as either female or male based on the organization of the body of such person for a specific reproductive role as indicated by the person's sex chromosomes, naturally occurring sex hormones, and internal and external genitalia present at birth. And so that doesn't account for trans people, or rather, it discounts trans people, and it doesn't even acknowledge the existence of intersex people, people with intersex conditions. So that's incredibly frustrating. This is also the bill, even though it's the Don't Say Gay bill, so you can't talk about being gay or being trans or being queer in schools. School employees can talk about the students being gay or trans or queer to their parents. So that's great, totally not putting kids in danger at all. The bill seeks to prohibit employees, contractors, and students from being required to use, from providing and being asked to provide certain titles and pronouns. So you can't be forced to use anybody's chosen pronouns, you can't be asked what your pronouns are, and you're not allowed to you're basically not even allowed to use them at all. So it's absurd. It also protects students who choose to discriminate from being punished for that behavior. It also has a section about sex ed classes, or like health class, or whatever you want to call it. A school shall classify males and females as provided in the previous section. Teach that biological males impregnate biological females by fertilizing the female egg with male sperm, that the female then gestates the offspring, and that these reproductive roles are binary, stable, and unchangeable. So it's like, okay, they're clearly taking a stance right now, and it would take a lot less words for them to just give us the finger. They're also really emphasizing abstinence, which obviously, yes, if you practice abstinence, you're not going to get pregnant, but they're really focused on that, and that worries me, because it makes me think that they're not even remotely concerned about like sexual health and safety. So that's another part of this bill. But as far as like, I don't know, it really, really worries me. And I grew up with very accepting parents. I was very, very lucky to be able to come home from school to a house where I did not have to worry about being myself. I am very privileged to be able to say that. But if my parents had been anything less than what they were, I can't even imagine what would have happened. Because my parents found out through my teacher. I was outed 2 months into ninth grade. This was, I guess, 12 or 13 years ago now. And a teacher overheard people talking about it, called my dad because they were friends, and told him. And my parents weren't exactly surprised. But if my parents hadn't been fantastic parents, that could have put me in real danger. And this bill is not only allowing school employees to put kids in danger by doing this, but they're encouraging it. And that's just, it's enraging to me. So it's all across the board just a very frustrating, unfortunate bill.
First of all, it's disgusting. The language is disgusting. These bills make me sick to my stomach reading some of them because of how ridiculous and incorrect and improper the verbiage is. If you're not really familiar with the way state legislature works, one day one bill can look a certain way, and then in 24 hours it's got like 3 amendments, and they're rewriting this and all that. And so it's constantly changing. And that is a tactic on the original author's parts to try and be like, Well, no, see, look, we changed it and like it's different. It's not really about this. They do change these things very fast and very often. This stuff is scary and it is life changing and life threatening.
It's tough being like a marginalized person when a lot of these bills, like beyond just the trans bills in Florida, there's been a lot of other bills targeting marginalized people. And there's like the book bans, banning AP like Black history courses. There's like the anti-immigrant stuff that's going on. So there's all kinds of intersecting harm that's happening to marginalized communities right now, and it feels so big and so loud. And honestly, the only thing getting me through right now is the community that I have found through this advocacy work and seeing the strength of this community. Florida and Texas, they're not like a monolith of like white people. Like there's all kinds of people who live in these states, all kinds of marginalized people, disabled people, like everything you could think of, right?
Their big thing is like, oh, we're trying to save the kids or protect the kids. And it's like, okay, so why aren't you working on the actual problems at hand? Like the number one cause for childhood deaths in Texas are guns. They're trying to give these solutions to problems that don't exist. I've been trying really hard to like see all perspectives and see both sides of this, but I genuinely can't see how children are being saved or protected if there are no regulations put in place for the number one cause of childhood death.
They're definitely, I mean, they're not being protected. There's no logical path that I can see for their judgment on this. Their logic, just it doesn't follow. In the bill, especially the language implies that they think just identifying and giving a name to how these kids are feeling, if they are trans or if they're queer or whatever, that inherently is the danger. And somehow by telling the parents, and hopefully the parents then preventing that from being the case, that somehow solves the danger. But instead they're just creating danger when there wasn't any.
Having experience as someone who wasn't really able to come out until adulthood, and the reason being because of very religious and white Christian views. The only thing that did for me was cause trauma, like severe trauma in my childhood. So, because you weren't allowing me to express myself the way that I wanted to do that, or the way that I felt I needed to do that, I just built up a lot of resentment towards my parents. I don't talk to like any of my family anymore because they all still believe this way. It didn't do any good for anybody except make those people who didn't like trans people feel more comfortable. But for the protection of me, the child at the time, I was not being protected at all. I was being put in more danger. And I am so grateful that I survived that experience because I know so many people probably haven't, or, might be in a position where I was in where like you weren't able to come out until way later. These laws that they're writing to protect kids are not protecting any kids at all.
I don't know how serious of like a solution this could be, but I have heard before like gun rights probably won't start happening more until like trans people start arming themselves for their own protection, especially with everything going on. And that's could be like that's very scary because that could also put us in further danger because it's like, oh, the person was armed, so I had to defend myself. And it's like, well, we had to arm ourselves to protect ourselves from the tomfoolery. And it is very, very scary to think like what kids are going through now because I thought we had it bad back in our days when we were hit with slurs or hate crimes being outed, but this is much more severe. This is putting those kids in a mental space where they see no solution, they see no future, they see no hope, they see no joy. And it's really, really aggravating that it's coming from people who are supposed to protect us. So shout out to those who are able to be advocates and activists wherever possible. I personally like can't even vote, so I feel very helpless, but the one thing that I can do is, witchcraft. I could do a little bit of spell, a little bit of hexing towards, the Satan or whatever they want to call. And it may seem like minuscule, like just a little tiny drop in the ocean, but what is the ocean but a multitude of drops? Once we all come together, we can become much more powerful, and that's what they fear, is when they realize that we have strength in numbers, we have strength in putting who will protect us in office and who we will be removing for lack thereof. And I also am very fortunate that my parents were very not super accepting, because when I was like 15 or something, they found out that I was gay. And before then, I had come out to my brother that I was bi. So, like, they had a couple of years in my high school where they were like getting okay with it. I remember having a conversation with my dad. He's like, well, I probably won't ever go to your marriage or support you, but like, I'm with you. And I was like, that's not support, like. And even when I came out to him as trans, at that point, like, I'd gone through all the LGBTQ, like, I'd been through the whole spectrum. And him being the Gemini that he was just like, well, as long as you're not a lesbian. Like, he can identify that trans women are women, but now he didn't want to be a lesbian. And I was like, why do you have to still be queerphobic? Like, and just despite him, I did have lesbian experiences. And sometimes I am a lesbian. Like, what about it? But thankfully, like, even when I showed up basically like this to my sister's graduation, I was very nervous. I was like, how are my parents going to react? How are they going to treat me? Like, my dad definitely still has some like language issues, which my mom has been working on him with, but it's just being able to be with my family and feel supported. I'm lucky to have that, and to know that kids might not have that is terrifying, because I know where I would have been if I didn't have that, you know what I mean? And uh I just, it's fucked.
Switching gears a little bit, SB 254, which is the gender affirming care ban slash abduction bill. If anyone hasn't heard about this yet, you're in for a wild ride with this one. This one not only prohibits, as they say, sex reassignment prescriptions and procedures for patients younger than 18, granting courts of this state, Florida, temporary emergency jurisdiction over a child present in this state if the child has been subjected to or is threatened with being subjected to sex reassignment prescriptions or procedures, and also warrants to take physical custody of a child. It allows the state to take custody of a child that's involved in custody proceedings between like parents that are going through divorce or whatever. And that has a lot of different ramifications. But in any case, what all of this essentially means is that if a trans child is in a supportive family environment, in a supportive home that is allowing them to pursue the care that they need, the state is allowed to basically kidnap that child and find them a more suitable, safe home that will not respect who they are, which is absolutely horrific. So that's lumped in there along with I'm sorry, it's all just, it's incredibly aggravating to even think about, but they will not allow any minors to undergo any sort of like hormone therapy or gender affirming surgeries, which I would argue that on average, the majority of trans youth don't get those surgeries anyway. You'd be very hard pressed to find a doctor or surgeon that would agree to do that if you're under 18. I've never met anybody myself. I know of people, like I believe Jazz Jennings got gender affirming surgery when she was 17, but that is such a rare case. And the reason that it's cited so often is because it was such big news, because it hadn't really happened other than that. I can't think of any other examples myself. They're creating laws against something that basically doesn't even, it's already not allowed. And now they're just being like, extra fuck you. But in addition to the focus on minors, requires that such prescriptions and procedures for patients older than 18 years of age be prescribed, administered, or performed only with the voluntary and informed consent of the patient, and only a physician may prescribe, administer, or perform such prescriptions and procedures. So apparently, and I found this information through Erin in the Morning. She does a lot of work tracking all of the anti-trans legislation. She's read every single bill in the country. According to her website, nurse practitioners have been responsible for about 80% of all gender affirming care in Florida. But because nurse practitioners are not considered physicians, they are no longer allowed to provide that care. So all of the people in Florida, my friends included, I know too many people all of a sudden that are having to scramble to find new providers for the care that they've been receiving for years in some cases. And that's just ridiculous. And also the fact that, I don't remember if it's this bill or a different bill. Yes, it's the SB 1580, Protections of Medical Conscience. Healthcare providers and healthcare payers, meaning insurance, I mentioned this earlier, have the right to deny care if you're trans. Even before all of this, when I was on T years ago, I always had problems going to the pharmacy to pick up my T, my testosterone prescriptions, every single time. And it was the same people, same pharmacy for 3 years. and every single time they tried to fuck with me about it. So it's just the fact that they're making it so much easier for people to fuck with you when it comes to your medical care and your quality of life is just evil. And they're listen to this. Violation of this section constitutes grounds for disciplinary action. Any healthcare practitioner who willfully or actively participates in a violation of subsection 1 commits a felony of the 3rd degree, punishable as provided in whatever sections those are. And any healthcare practitioner who violates subsection 2, 3, or 4 commits a misdemeanor of the 1st degree, punishable as provided in whatever section. So it makes me feel like even healthcare providers who support trans people and who want to provide that care potentially might stop providing that care out of fear of losing their license or being charged with a felony or whatever, just for allowing us to make medical decisions for our own selves.
Yeah, the fact that they're essentially banning care for transgender youth, we have seen like literally a slew of people fleeing the state. I have seen dozens and dozens and dozens of GoFundMes of trans families leaving the state because they're scared for their children. And it's not just because of that bill. It's like they don't want their kid to grow up in a state that doesn't even recognize their humanity, you know? And of course, like it's trans families with trans kids, it's cisgender parents with trans kids. I've seen polyamorous families with multiple polyamorous parents with a trans child. Like I have seen every combination of like people you can think of like fleeing the state because of these laws. Hell, I've seen people who aren't even trans who are like, F this, I'm out. Like I've had to share so many GoFundMes. It's really honestly depressing and scary. And especially when you start seeing GoFundMes of people that you personally know and see that they're leaving too, like that is gut wrenching to say the least, to be like waking up in the morning, the first thing you see is that someone you know is uprooting their entire life after spending their whole life in Florida and leaving to a state you don't even know where they're going because for safety reasons they won't disclose it, you know? So there's that. So 80% of like HRT and gender affirming care in the state of Florida is prescribed or was prescribed from nurse practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
So they've effectively banned 80% of gender affirming care in Florida by passing this law, which is just bullshit. So now I have like there's clinics in my area, one of the largest like LGBTQ clinics that I go to for my primary care, now has to hire like a medical doctor on their team just to prescribe and like continue like serving the people in their area, and they're losing clients like left and right because they don't have a medical doctor on staff. So there are people leaving, trying to find care somewhere else, people leaving the state. It's an absolute show down here. Like it's bad. We're doing the best we can and trying to get people care, though there is like a silver lining in this, and that the community is really showing up to try to help people, and we have all kinds of like funds and stuff to try to get people the care that they need despite these laws. Like it's much harder to get care, but it's still possible. Like we will make sure that people get the care they need. It just really sucks right now. It's really rough and it's kind of chaos while we figure this all out. I think we'll ultimately be okay. I don't think these laws will continue to pass. I think there will be pushback from people. But yeah, that's just what I'm seeing in Florida. It's really shitty, but our community has been like showing up in every way possible, trying to make this better for people. But yeah, it's been very rough. It's been very rough, like emotionally and physically on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We're just trying to be here for each other.
I mean, that's all you can do sometimes.
It feels like with that whole going after the doctors that it goes against like the doctor oath of like never putting your patients in danger or things of that nature. So it's very contradictory because it's like, do they uphold that oath or do they get arrested because of their upholding their oath? It's so confusing. It's so mind-boggling. It makes no fucking sense. I feel like people shouldn't be making medical bills if they're not in the medical field. Like if you have no experience, if you have no connections to it, it's like what gives you the knowledge, what gives you the experience to be able to stand on that pedestal and say what's right and what's wrong. And going back to the child abduction one, there is a story on TikTok that I unfortunately had to see of somebody who lost their child or custody of their child because they were providing gender care for them. And so what they're trying to get out of Florida with the rest of the kids that they have while they're still trying to fight active custody for the kid that they had lost custody of.
I will try to be brief in my summary of the bathroom bill. I do want to summarize it for people in the chat in case they don't know about it. the bathroom bill in Florida that passed, HB 1521, essentially states that restrooms and changing facilities should be segregated based on assigned sex at birth. The way that they define changing facility includes a lot of different things, like dressing rooms and fitting rooms, which I found surprising because I don't think I can remember being in a dressing room or fitting room at like a store that was gendered. It tends to usually be just one room with little stalls that don't even have doors. It's like curtains, or it's the kind of shop that has like the two dressing rooms that are just unisex and you have to ask them for a key. But anyway, I digress. Beginning July 1st, 2024, so we actually have some time before people can submit complaints about this. It still goes into effect, I believe, this summer, but people can submit complaints to the Attorney General alleging that a covered entity, so like a business or whoever's in charge of like a public building, failed to meet the minimum requirements for restrooms and changing facilities under this bill. A covered entity that fails to comply is subject to penalties and to licensure or regulatory disciplinary action as applicable. And I believe, if I remember correctly, it involves like fines at varying levels. I will say, I did find in this, this section does not apply to an individual who is or has been under treatment by a physician who, in his or her good faith clinical judgment, performs procedures upon or provides therapies to a minor born with a medically verifiable genetic disorder of sexual development, including various things. So this bill apparently does take intersex people into account, which I found interesting and surprising. But again, I don't know how they would possibly... I have no idea how they would enforce that. Everything about the bathroom bills, it just... The previous two bills were already infuriating, enraging. I'm pissed off about it, both on my own behalf and on the behalf of everybody that I love and care about. But this one is genuinely terrifying to me because I personally have avoided gendered public bathrooms for 7-ish years now, because when I was trying to use gendered bathrooms back in the day, back when I was a boy, literally, it did not go well. I'm not going to share details, but I have dealt with verbal harassment in bathrooms. I have been mildly assaulted in bathrooms in various ways. People have treated me like I've been overreacting to that. People have acted like I'm blowing things out of proportion. I'm being a pessimist. I'm being, not the word that I would choose, but I'm being stupid. You can't just discredit what I have literally been through myself.
The bathroom bills, that is very concerning for me. I don't purposely try to pass as like a cisgender woman, although a lot of people just assume that I am when they look at me. I've never really had to worry about anyone like clocking me as non-binary in a bathroom, being like, what are you doing here? I usually use the women's bathroom, sometimes the men's if the line in the women's bathroom is too long, which now I'm kind of double thinking if like I should do that now, because now it's like, oh, if I go use the men's room, like someone asks me to leave, I can get arrested. And I'm pretty sure you go to jail for like a year or something. It's insane. So my partner is non-binary. They use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and they present pretty feminine. People kind of just assume that she's a cisgender woman, like she gets sheet in public all the time. That's just because she looks very femme. She looks like a cisgender woman, I guess, to these people. And I've always kind of worried about her safety in bathrooms, and now I'm like fucking terrified. To her, she's like, we've had this discussion before, and I've told her, I'm like, I'm really scared for you, and I've expressed this to her, and she told me, she's like, this doesn't really change anything for me. Like, I'm always feeling that way about being in the bathroom anyway, but that's one thing I have to worry about now is like, what if my spouse is like out somewhere, something happens, some like person who's in the bathroom, because they never stated how this was going to be enforced. So it just emboldens vigilantes to like stake out in the bathroom and clock people, basically. It's already happened to cisgender people. There was something that happened recently, I don't know what state it was in, but there was like a cisgender lesbian who got like arrested because she was using the women's bathroom and someone thought she was a man. It's been happening for years. It's only going to get worse, and now people are going to go to jail for it. So that's something that is extremely concerning for me.
There's no really good way for them to even enforce this, especially because there's already multiple times where, like maybe like a butch person, like a butch lesbian goes into, the women's restroom and people are like, oh, that looks like a man. And like, how are they going to enforce this without like stripping someone down and like checking if they've got the right parts, and even thinking about like trans people who are stealth, like what are they gonna do, like if like in the off chance someone's like, oh hey, maybe like they don't seem like, you know, this sex or whatever, like it becomes really dangerous for a lot of trans people. And even like, I don't know, I think there's like a lot of racism in how people think that like a woman should look and a man should look, and it largely is very discriminatory for a lot of Black and brown folks who have masculine features and things like that. And so it just, I don't know, I think there's gonna be a lot of ongoing dangers for Black and brown folks, even more so than we've been seeing, where it's just, it's going to continually just get more and more unsafe, except there's going to have a law saying, oh hey, this is the right thing to do, and it's like, no, no.
It's very irritating too, because it's like, what bathroom do I use to make y'all comfortable? Because like, I'm okay with going to the men's bathroom if I have to go, but then that puts me in danger of possibly getting harassed or putting myself in a situation where I'm gonna have to fight somebody. And then if I go to the women's restroom, you know, I can't make anybody happy. I can't pee anywhere. One minor solution is like, yeah, I could like get an adult diaper, but like I shouldn't have to get to that point. We shouldn't have to find workarounds or secret hacks to be comfortable in a fucking bathroom. Like we're just doing our business. It makes no sense. And then the people who are predators, they are the ones who should be watched out for in the bathroom. Because, you know, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had experiences in bathrooms that were very uncomfortable, especially when we were like underage, where somebody was, you know, trying to be XYZ. I don't want to use the terminology because I don't want to trigger nobody, but it just makes no sense. And I'm lucky that there are some parts in this town that I know I'll be safe and comfortable to use whatever bathroom. There was one bar in particular that I worked at where like the first thing that they asked me was like what my pronouns were, and I was still exploring, so I was like, oh, what are my pronouns? And you know, before I was on probation, it was a great time going to the bathroom there. I didn't have to worry about a damn thing. I was able to go in there with my friends and just feel like that strength in numbers as well, because sometimes that's what we need, and it's not easily accessible to everybody to have a community in person to be able to like serve as like that shield, that backup if needed.
I've been calling this for years, ever since the North Carolina bathroom bill back in, I believe, 2015. I have seen this coming. I knew that it was a matter of time. I'm surprised it took this long, but it's like the worst possible thing for me to be like, haha, I told you so, because I'm not fucking happy about it, but like, I don't know. It just, I was already terrified, and now I'm not willing to risk a year in prison just to avoid getting a UTI. Because also, this bill expands to prisons, too. It expands to detention centers, juvenile detention centers, literally every single, like, public building, or business, or schools, or anything like that. And it applies to students, it applies to faculty members, it applies to employees of the public buildings, etc., etc. So it's a very wide-ranging bill, and it does target far more than just trans people. Because as Julian was mentioning, there are plenty of cisgender people that are not perceived as the gender that they identify as and the gender that they were assigned. That extends far past just trans people. So